All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome, everybody, to the third day of our Net Zero Research Conference. I'm Dr. Andy Smallbone. I'm an Associate Professor at Durham, and I'm the Director of the Decarbonisation of Heating and Cooling Network. And I'm going to be chairing today's session and tomorrow as well. The next 2 days are structured around the themes of the EPSRC network for the decarbonisation of heating and cooling. I guess the last 2 days have been principally about hydrogen, and particularly about hydrogen in for transport, but now we're moving over to heat and cooling more specifically. So over the next 2 days, we're going to be looking at the challenges across different sources of heating and the challenges faced by different sectors in meeting their net zero aims. I'll give you a quick explanation about what the network is, and then we'll move into the sessions. So we've only really recently launched the Network Plus on heating and cooling. And I guess the first question that everyone asks is, what is a Network Plus? So the UK research councils have established this kind of framework of Network Pluses. They've been created to provide an impact and dissemination platform for the many projects that the UKRI funds. They're extremely important mechanism for bringing UK industry together from academia all the way through to industry, in order to make sure that everyone knows that all of these hundreds of millions of pounds worth of projects, everyone knows that they're going on, and that information is shared. So what we've got is a dedicated team to organise dissemination engagement activities and support those projects. And we have other roles, like taking some kind of leadership role in leading what's happening in that particular area. And our challenge is the decarbonisation of heating and cooling. And I should also note there are other Network Pluses across challenges like transport, bioenergy, energy storage, etc., etc. The last 2 days have been about one of those in transport, which is obviously hydrogen transport technology. Who are Network Pluses for? Well, I think across these 8 different titles here, it's for everyone. Principally, I guess, about research and academia and people involved in technology and social science. But in general, actually, there should be an event funded through our network, which is relevant to everyone, all the way through to the general public. And in reflecting that, the fact that it's all paid for by UK Research Council, it's free for anyone who wants to attend our activities. There's no official membership, there's no membership fee, just sign up, come along. Obviously in lockdown, most stuff has happened in the online domain, but hopefully we'll be transitioning to face-to-face stuff in good time. The Network Plus is being led by Durham, Oxford, Brunel, Heriot-Watt, Leeds and Northumbria, and is supported and initially set up with lots of organisations supporting the application. But it's really for everyone. We might be leading it, but events and activities and speakers and so on, they're all from all over different places internationally and across the UK. We have a number of kind of core objectives. The first is to grow a world-leading UK-based research network around the topic of thermal energy, and that isn't tied to any particular objective, in the sense that it's just supposed to support net zero carbon heating and cooling, and also it's for residential, business and industrial sectors. It's not tied to anyone specifically. We aim to bring together different kind of groups, whether they're technology developers, end users, social scientists and policymakers, and we're trying to get them to talk together, because this is a whole challenge. it's an integrated solution that will lead us to a net zero in heating and cooling. And we'll do that through a number of routes. We're talking about sandpits, workshops, opportunities for secondments and studies, and wider engagement activities. We also aim to try and do some cross-cutting and make some cross-cutting challenges via research and developing some consensus around them. And then we have some flexible funding. I guess this last point is really we have some funding to support doing these secondments, support doing some startup research activities and so on in order to do that, and also how to upskill our early career researchers so that we can keep the ideas coming. Across our 5 core themes, and these were constructed around all of the different areas that are relevant, and they're quite general. But the first one is really around what we've called primary engineering technologies and systems for decarbonisation. So this key theme is on the technical end of the scale. This is about heat pumps. This is about hydrogen heating systems and so on. The second theme here is underpinning technologies, materials, control, retrofit, and infrastructure. So these are the parts or the systems that enable you to heat or cool your home or your business. Third theme is around future energy systems and economics. So how does this fit in with the whole wider net zero challenge? Where does the energy come from for our next generation of heating systems and cooling systems? And how much will it cost? And how will that be enabled? And then themes 4 and 5, perhaps slightly less technical and more social science based. The first one being societal impact and how do end users perceive our transition to net zero, and how do we build those into our thinking. And then number 5 is more of a top-down, how do we support policy in making and enabling this, and how do we support leadership to make some of the difficult decisions that may need to be made in order to get us to net zero within the expected timeframes. Now, all of this will be done through the network platforms. We're planning to help do this through what we originally put in was 20 co-organized events, which would be conferences, sandpits, trainings, and workshops. This was obviously pre-COVID, so some of this is changing a little bit as we talk, but to give you an idea, there will be a lot of events in and around this topic. We will facilitate this through some secondments and travel bursaries when travel permits. And as I mentioned, there's some feasibility funding budget available, and that will be announced in due course. And we're also developing technology roadmaps, which should help us explain what the challenge is to a wider audience. Now, this is kind of my last slide before we start moving on to the talks, but we've got a number of different routes to push outreach. The best one and the most informed one is the Net Zero Research website. If you go to there, you can sign up and then you can get on the email list. If you're on the email list, you know when activities and they'll be pushed into your inbox. You can always go there and find out when the next event is. Over the last few months, we've been doing lots of webinars and so on. So, and you can also go back and look at the videos because everything was recorded, and that's all available on those different platforms. So now coming really on to the today. Today's topic is heat and energy systems. We're not sure if this was by design, but today is also Earth Day, and that today is a day to reflect on what we can do to help restore our planet. And this is obviously a very timely combination because heat and energy systems is possibly the UK's biggest challenge for reaching net zero. And we've basically structured today into 3 parts. What we're going to do now, we're going to have a question time session. The topic of the session is heat and energy system, which is the topic of the day. We're lucky to be joined by Dr. Jenny Crawley. Professor Peter Taylor and Professor John Gluyas, who've both just spoken in detail, and Dr. Jenny Cooper. So what we've done over the last few days is we've reached out to the conference audience and asked for questions for the panel. And what we've done is we've gone through that and we've selected what we think are the best ones. And we've shared these with the panel in advance so they know what's coming. Some of them have had more notice than others, but they know what's coming. So what I'll do is I'll go along and ask everyone in turn and then prompt for more detail or clarification if they say something which I don't quite follow or don't quite understand. So what we'll then do, I'll go through the list of everyone and I'll go through the same order each time, but the first person will shift along each time, so you won't always be first. First up, we've got Jenny Crawley. So Jenny is a research associate in the Energy and Buildings at UCL Energy Institute. She's also the UCL academic manager for the EPSRC funded Centre for Doctoral Training in Energy Demand and Energy Resilience and the Building Environment. Her research interests include the design and execution of socio-technical research into domestic energy use, in-use building performance, and analysis and interpretation of energy data. So Jenny, what we'll do is I'll ask you the first question, and then if you answer, and then I'll then introduce everyone else and then ask them the same question. So the first question is, bearing in mind today is Earth Day, in a sustainable world, where do you think the primary energy for heating will come from?
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I should say first, this is not my area of expertise, but this is something that I'm going to try and go into later in my heat pumps talk. And I had to seek advice from colleagues on this because lots of people have had a go at modelling the energy system and trying to combine it with modelling the built environment. And so our colleagues at UCL who have done this on an hourly timescale have come up with a solution that's mostly wind and solar, but that has got a bit of nuclear and quite a bit of natural gas, and it depends on carbon capture and storage. So just say it's, their solution's dependent on something that hasn't, been kind of proven at scale yet. And also, as we've seen, there's going to be a big role for storage, both daily level storage and seasonal storage to meet heat demand. But I'm planning on showing some pictures later for anyone who's kind of interested in this scenario. And like I say, it's just one possible scenario.
Great, thank you. Next one on the list is Professor Peter Taylor, who we've just heard from earlier this morning, and he's a chair in sustainable energy systems at the University of Leeds. So the question for you is, bearing in mind today's Earth Day, in a sustainable world, where do you think the primary energy for heating will come from?
Yeah, well, as Jenny's mentioned, I mean, I think eventually we're going to have to look at it from renewable sources. I think the points that were made in the previous question and answer are also important, that the first thing we need to do is try and reduce heat demand. So in terms of space heating, there's no reason why, at least in theory, you couldn't design buildings which really require virtually no space heating at all. Clearly, if we're looking at industry, and I don't think we should forget that, then we need to inject heat into various processes to break materials down and dry things and all the rest of it. In that case, we probably will need some kind of exogenous heat input. But if we can get that from the natural environment, from some kind of renewable resource, whether it be from the geothermal heat that John was talking about, or the wind and solar that Jenny mentioned, then I think that has to be the aim. I wasn't quite sure in this question, when the sustainable future was that this person was thinking about, but certainly in the longer term, I think we have to be moving to, first of all, reducing the amount of heat we use, and then using renewable resources of some sort.
Thank you, Peter. And then we've got the next person we've got here is Jenny Cooper. Jenny specializes in energy research and development management with a particular focus on energy networks. She has over 25 years experience in innovation within the energy industry, with an initial focus on the electricity industry, developing into gas, short and long-term strategic planning, environmental issues, new technology, and increasingly all aspects of energy technology. And so, Jenny, welcome. And can I ask you, in a sustainable world, where will the primary energy for heating come from?
Thanks, Andy. And I realise that's kind of out of date, because I think 35 is probably more than 25. But 25 of that was in National Grid. So I'm kind of coming with a bias here to some extent, saying, I think Peter said electricity is clearly not a primary source, but electricity is there as getting ever more on the low carbon emissions. So I think if you look at the CCC information and National Grid scenario planning, in the next 30 years, the electricity sector is aiming to be net zero. And the scenarios are actually quite conservative. I think you could do it quicker. At the same time, you're doubling the size of, or you're doubling the demand probably, and the potential of the network. And reducing to virtually zero the carbon intensity. So I think we're going to have to rely, and we do rely a lot on the networks. I do have confidence that the networks will get there. Big wind's clearly critical. As everyone else said, a bit like we've had to do blended learning in schools and universities over this last year. I think it's going to be a blended bundle of all sorts of things. A little comment here, I think we need to think worldwide, not just UK, to look at this, because net zero relies on the whole world. And unsubtly, Ofgem, UKRI, politicians, everyone have actually got to think together rather than perhaps start to get to play off each other. And that's the only way we're really going to get a solution.
Right, thank you. And then finally, we've got Professor John Gluyas, who is the director of the Durham Energy Institute and just spoke at length about heat from geothermal systems. So John, where will the primary energy from heating come from?
You've probably captured much of what I might have said with the three speakers just now. But I think there's some of the key things to think about here. And that's harks back to a couple of things I mentioned in the talk, that heat is the bit that's typically left over from energy transition, various energy transformations. So, your kinetic energy when you're cycling along the road is transferred to heat when you apply the brakes. Now, we're not going to be able to use the heat there, but that sort of piece plays out throughout. So a current power station, a gas-fired power station, might be 50% efficient in producing electricity. The other 50% goes up the chimney, and then we use the electricity to generate heat in our houses. So there are some things that don't quite tally there. I think there are going to be lots of different sources. Electricity, undoubtedly, coupled with zero carbon electricity, will play a key part. But so will the insulation, which we talked about in various references. Upgrading heat using heat pumps. Jenny will come to speak about that later on today. All of these will play a part. But for me, one of the main things is not wasting the heat. So heat storage will become a large part of the system, whether it's heat storage large scale in flooded mines or aquifers, or some of the phase change materials, or even some of the other materials which people like Tony Roskilde and his team are working with, which allow you to shift collection from use, and then you get opportunities to open up to use solar thermal a great deal. On a beautiful day like today, the solar thermal panels on my roof will be running at about 120 centigrade. Unfortunately, I can only store that for 2 tanks worth of water or thereabouts. But longer term storage will enable that heat gathered on the roof to be used over clearly a longer period. So I think the devil's in the detail, and we'll use lots of different heat stores and heat sources, whether it's waste heat generated from electricity, or what have you. For sure, for the high energy requirements, high heat requirements, we will need to be using either hydrogen, electricity, or concentrated solar, but they're relatively small compared with the low heat requirements of the bulk of the population. And as Jenny Cooper said, this needs to be done across the globe. It's no use exporting your carbon footprint elsewhere because you want to mine someone's mountain for neodymium for your large magnets for offshore wind turbines.
Great, thank you very much, John. So the next question will come to Peter first. So the second one is, how do we integrate resilience into our heating plans for net zero? Obviously, our energy system doesn't need to work 90% of the time, it needs to work 99.99% of the time. So how do we make sure that when we're having these discussions in and around kind of these topics, that we make sure resilience is designed in the way we think about these things?
Yeah, well, I think one of the interesting things about the transition to a low carbon future is that we are probably going to end up with an energy system that is more interconnected. So in the past, the transport sector didn't have many points of contact, for instance, with the electricity sector. In the future, as we move to electric vehicles, then obviously that connection is going to become much more obvious. And so I think that probably brings both risks and potential mitigation strategies as well. So there may be risks of sort of cascading incidents across vectors and across sectors which didn't exist before. But there may also be the opportunity for different sectors or different fuels to step in. So I mean, for instance, the hybrid heat pump, which uses both electricity and some other kind of fuel, is an example of a technology, but which perhaps, although the sort of resilience that we're talking about perhaps isn't the primary reason that it was developed, it does have that additional resilience. So it's not only about meeting peak, but if you have a power cut or something, then maybe you'll be able to switch to the alternative fuel. I mean, I have to say, I think in terms of heating, and particularly when we're talking about space heating, then the most effective strategy in terms of resilience is the one that we've been talking about previously, which is to not really need it. If we're able to insulate our homes significantly and make sure they don't lose heat that quickly, then if we get a cut in electricity, or the hydrogen goes off, or whatever we're using it, maybe our house will keep warm for 24 hours, 36 hours, at least at a tolerable temperature, and perhaps we can just pop on an extra jumper, and then hopefully the supply comes back on. So I think the more that we're needing heat input to meet our comfort requirements, the more vulnerable we are. If we manage to reduce that need, then I think naturally we become more resilient.
Great, thank you, Peter. I should just say before we come to Jenny Cooper, who's next, is that you can see down in the chat there's questions kind of coming in, which actually many of you who are listening might be able to answer. So please feel free to answer questions within the chat if you're interested in them, and have a in parallel debate in there. That's no problem. You can please do that, because we won't necessarily be able to cover all of these topics simultaneously. So coming back to the main discussion, Jenny, as in Jenny Cooper. So how do we integrate resilience into our heating plans for net zero?
Kind of taking that further, I think the thing that really struck me is that we need to get the planning right as well. Because I don't know about any of you guys, but I'm seeing lots of houses, homes going up left, right and centre around rural Warwickshire. And they are all being built on old systems. Ironically, we had a guy who installs heat pumps he's bought a house fairly close by, wanted the heat pump in there, and was told, no, you have to have the gas system installed, and then if you want to put the heat pump in later, you have to take it all out and put the heat pump in. And it is just ridiculous. You can effectively build a net zero house at the same cost as what is currently typically being built. It is complete and utter madness, and really the only way forward in that is got to be from the government, and they need to do something. This is the words that are being spoken at the moment will go nowhere if planning is ignored. And I was listening this morning, I didn't hear anything that anybody spoke of on Radio 4 that covered that issue. It may be while I wasn't listening, but that's there. The other thing I think we need to learn from others, having been in the transmission networks business for most of my working career, it is a very reliable, has been developed as a very reliable network, and there's knowledge of how to develop that network to be reliable. When I first joined the industry, there were threats from bombings and various other things that were going to be made on the network, and it was known at the time that there were areas of the network that were very vulnerable. That was therefore model changed, and it is in the way it is now. And the networks will be continuing. That risk and criticality thinking needs to be extended to all the networks, how they work together, how they learn from each other. It is this whole energy system. And again, I think that also needs to be developed into how research is thought about. 20 years ago, when the energy programme was put in place, there wasn't an awful lot going on in many of these spaces. It's a jolly good thing that funding was put in place, because we are now, not only have we got fantastic research, but we've got the people needed to do the research. So resilience is also longer term about research and people.
Great, thank you, Jenny. And John?
I think you've probably heard it all. Build passive, for one, to cut down the requirement. Peter's comment on the integration of different systems is also of critical importance, in that there will be alternatives. And I've begun to feel like a bit like a stuck record, because heat is the tail end of everything. There is if you like, a built-in opportunity there for harnessing heat from many different sources, and so electricity is a particular vector which relies upon electrons alone moving in through wires to your house. But with heat, there are lots of alternatives, and I think we will become more resilient because of the diversity of potential sources and the interconnectedness of those sources.
Thanks, John. And Jenny, Crawley?
Yes, hi, resilience. So just to say that our Centre for Doctoral Training in Energy Resilience in the Built Environment is very much coming at it from the perspective of how can the built environment help build the resilience of the energy system, but it also can be looked at from the other point of view, which is how does the built environment actually create a problem for the energy system as things get electrified. So I think these are kind of two different ways of seeing it. And in terms of how the built environment can help the resilience of the energy system, we've been looking quite a lot at the use of thermal mass in buildings, and especially domestic buildings, and to what extent switching on and off heating can help stabilize energy demands and the effect that has on occupants. And we've been looking at kind of the occupant perspective on that. And then in terms of how much of a problem the built environment will be for the energy system, again, that's something that we'll be kind of covering later on today, and kind of looking at exactly where the problem lies and exactly which hours of the day and some of the things we could do about it.
Are higher heating bills an inevitable outcome of our transition to net zero? It's very common, and historically it's commonly been stated. And then who pays for the difference for that?
I think this is an issue about whether you're talking about heating bills or whether you're talking capital cost, because there's sort of two different things. And I'm going to take this from a very personal point of view, because following an excellent seminar that we had at the Durham Energy Institute a while back, talking indeed about Barnard Castle Mill, I seem to believe just about at the time when it was being used as an eye testing capability. We then took the opportunity over lockdown to look at our house. So we live in a house that was built in the 1800s, and thought there was no way you could do anything radical. We were stuck on oil, and I was particularly unhappy about how, but you know, that's all we thought was there. In December, we got a heat pump. If you could see outside, the PV is currently being installed. It would have been installed at the same time if the planners hadn't turned it down to start with, which is, again, this is why planning is so important. And there's an EV sat on the drive. We have, in the first 3 months that we've had the heat pump, our costs have gone down on a revenue level by over 30% straight away, but clearly there's a capital outlay. So my challenge really is to everyone. I think we all have to think about, if you can afford it, we have to act for the common good. For us, getting off oil is huge, made a huge difference. I was just fairly desperate to get off oil. And the house is better heated, undoubtedly. There's no doubt about it. If you're in the house now, it is more comfortable generally than it ever used to be. So there's two sides to that. Yes, it was a huge capital outlay, undoubtedly, but the running costs are less. And for a rural environment, that's made the difference to us.
So following up on that, actually, there's been a question about the noise from your heat pumps. Having just installed one, have you noticed the noise?
No. The heat pump, obviously, it is pumping, as it were, but the noise from that is no different to the gas boiler that kicking in was probably noisier, in all honesty. Right, so okay. No, it's for us. And another interesting one, though, it does depend what it is, because at the same time we're trying to get a heating solution for the church, and there's no way that heat pump's going to work for the church because it's not occupied. Yeah, we work from home, so actually it's a good solution for us. Solutions are always going to be different for different people.
Okay, so John, back to the original question: are higher heating bills an inevitable outcome, and then who pays for the difference?
Well, I think Jenny's set the scale out there very nicely, and I will follow suit from a great segue in a way, because we've done a very similar route. We haven't yet fitted the heat pump, but we have solar thermal and PV, and so the running costs of those are really quite, the combined value of those relative to our electricity costs are really very important and substantial. And I've also planted about 1,000 willow. We've got a new house which is properly insulated, and the willow's at the stage now where it's coppiced and dried, and being able to reuse it for heating in the winter if we need it, which we tend not to. It's more of a luxury than that. But the key, in a way, thinking. So I think the key is that capital outlay and making the homes much more efficient in terms of heat retention. On a pure basis of, if you did nothing but simply swapped out gas for electricity, yes, it would cost more because of the way they're priced by the nation. But I don't think it need cost more, because you would use less of the electricity. So that really is the key. But we have as a species got, if you go back a couple of generations, our grandparents or great grandparents would have been out gathering firewood or even hewing coal. The real cost of energy dropped dramatically when it was this really energy dense material called gas, whether it came from coal gas or indeed from natural gas, was piped to your home. So we've had it very cheap in the sense of for bulk energy costs for the past 50 years or so. That needn't change if we manage our energy use appropriately. And in a final segue from Jenny, Durham Energy Institute, I think Jackie ought to probably say something here. Today, I think, announces a major project working with the Church of England to help it decarbonise the whole of its estate in the UK. So watch this space, Jenny.
Yeah, thanks for advertising my project, John.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, Andy, your project. Yes, of course it's your project. I do know that.
Yeah, I think it. Yeah, well, we'll see. I don't know how far that's gone into the media yet, but
No,
maybe it'll be popping up soon.
Today, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll certainly be interested in hearing about that one then. I know a lot of others that will too.
So next is Jenny Crawley. So about the heating bills, are higher heating bills inevitable, and who pays for the difference?
Yeah. So I think if future solutions were going to be lower cost than currently, they would have happened by now. So it's pretty inevitable that all the different options are more expensive. And also, as people have been pointing out in the chat, the capital cost is going to be a barrier probably to most households, to all but a few environmentally motivated householders, I think. And so finding ways to finance this transition is going to be absolutely imperative. And I can't really speak about that, being more of a technical person myself, but this is a problem that really needs to be worked on now. And I hope the government are already working on this.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the fourth and fourth question that you've been sent is around what is the next key technological advancement for the heating sector, or what do you think? I guess is probably more precise. What do you think the key technological advancement for the heating sector is next? And that will be going to according to my list here. Did I miss off Peter from the last round? I think I did.
You did. I thought I'd escaped.
Sorry, Peter. So yeah, the question for you is about higher heating bills, an inevitable outcome, and who pays for the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what I would say has already been said. I mean, I think the financing question is key. I think with a lot of renewable technologies, the cost structure is different to what we're used to with fossil fuels. So with fossil fuels, you had a capital cost, which was, not insignificant, but then you had quite high running costs because you had to pay for the fuel. And of course, those running costs were uncertain because fuel prices went up and down. Typically with renewable technologies, you have a higher capital cost, but then often the running costs are virtually free or very cheap. And so it's getting used to a new cost structure. I mean, Jenny's probably right that overall, the costs are probably higher because otherwise people would be doing it immediately. I mean, I guess the other point, I'm beginning to sound a bit like a stuck record on this as well, is that if you also combine your new heating system with insulation, then maybe the total bill might not necessarily go up over the long time. But I think that the financing is the key, and we may move into it with the next question. But things like heat as a service and all the rest of it may be a way of doing that. But we've been told over the last 20 years that choice is good and being able to switch is good. So we've been encouraged to switch energy supplier and find the cheapest deal. And I think many of the problems around finding viable financing models is that consumers need to be locked into some longer term agreement in order for whoever's providing the financing to make their money back on it. So yeah, it's probably financing that is key on that one.
Right. Thanks, Peter. I think that's the consensus really around what do we do with the capex. How do we deal with that? And once that can be dealt with, then lots of opportunities then open up, I think. So yeah, the final question is, what's the next key technological advancement for the heating sector, do you think? John Gluyas, I think you are the first on the list this time, and we'll go through the same sequence again.
Thanks, Andy. I'd prefer not to have the word technological in there, because I think Peter, with the finance and societal elements, are the key here. But answering the question, I would say heat storage. Given that it doesn't move very well as we stand, and isn't very easily saved, then heat storage and heat storage advancement are the key, and that will come in materials. Some of the things, Andy, that you and the Durham team are working on in engineering, and some of it will come in terms of large scale heat storage, the likes of what I mentioned in the talk. But it's that ability to save heat and use it when you need it. So unlock the heat source from the heat demand, or get them properly coupled together. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, John. Thanks for advertising us me again.
Yeah, I'll get the beer later on from yes, yeah.
So Jenny, Crawley, what do you think the next advancement is?
Completely, yeah, agree with John that kind of the technical issues are just one aspect, and it's really financial and societal as well that we need to work on. But technologically, yeah, seasonal energy storage and potentially carbon capture and storage if we're going to go down a partial element of natural gas.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And Peter Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder also whether it is not necessarily about the energy technologies, but about the way, the controls and the way that we operate technologies. I mean, we frequently heat parts of our houses that we don't use. So better control of heating, I think, would be important. If we are to move towards a heat as a service model, then the sort of IT and data issues that are highlighted in my talk, I think, are going to be crucial. And so, you know, a more intelligent use of energy within the home, possibly extending a little bit beyond heating, but, you know, the idea that you can use things like demand side management to balance the grid and all the rest of it. I think these things, you know, at least potentially are things which could revolutionize the way that we think about the provision of energy in the home.
Thank you. And Jenny Cooper.
Fundamentally, I'm not sure I know, to be honest, but I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who have a better idea. You know, we need some short-term fixes, some longer-term technological fixes, and there's some brilliant science and engineering going on that's hopefully going to give us the common sense to move on into those. I think for industry, CCS and things like that is going to be a particular importance. You know, that kind of hit a brick wall some years back when the funding was removed from looking at things like at CCS and things like that. So that's had to build itself back up again as an area. Just going slightly off piece though as well, and I think John spoke briefly about this earlier as well, thinking about the whole circular economy, so the whole sort of net benefit of technology. There's not what we're using, how we're using it, how we're recycling, all of those issues. It would be great to think that they were being considered as well as just the technology itself.
Thank you. I think that's the end of kind of the questions that we'd put in front of you. I'm not going to try and catch you out with some more, but I think, you know, if you look at the chat, there's a bit of discussion, and some of the most interesting ones I think are in relation to fuel poverty. So I don't know if anyone has got any comments on any of those. I'd rather than you put your hand up and said to say something rather than necessarily for me to impose it on you. So I don't know if anyone's got any kind of ideas on how you would deal if there is an additional cost or there's a capex. What kind of models might be out there to support the transition for lower income families?
I mean, I noticed that Brian has just put in the chat that Green Homes grant would be good. Of course, a Green Homes grant that actually worked would be good. I mean, there seems to be an area that, I mean, it doesn't seem to me to be a particular, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't some challenges, but the government seems to have made a peculiar mess of its various attempts at doing this from the, what was it, the Green Deal thing through to Green Homes Grant. I mean, I think we've established what the issues are. You've got high upfront costs. You've then potentially got lower running costs, and so you need to find something which spreads the costs around. You know, if you also manage to link that so that people are not paying for the fuel inputs but are paying for the service that they get, and that might be all to the good as well, because that might provide additional incentives for people who are running that system to provide that service at lower cost and with lower fuel input. So you know, I think we know what the issues are. Just seemingly we've been capable of delivering it. But perhaps that will change, you know, in the future. I think it needs to change. I mean, of all the areas of decarbonisation policy, which I think are lagging behind, you know, stuff around buildings and homes and upgrading the fabric and then potentially upgrading the heating system as well is the one that we really need to get on and do it. And we're just not. And not only that, but there are no, you know, there are not even whispers, as far as I know, about policies, new policies coming forward to deliver on this. So that has to be a priority, I would say.
Thanks, Peter. I think Bryony's turned on her camera, suggesting that maybe she wants to say something or comment on that somehow.
I don't know if I'm allowed to.
You are allowed, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, obviously National Energy Action is the National Fuel Poverty Charity. I'm not in the policy departments, I'm in the technical team. So we test lots of new technologies, putting them into people's homes, seeing how they work. We know a lot about how, you know, behaviour change is key to getting people to properly use heat pumps, and the expectation trying to make it work like a gas boiler, it can't, you know, so. But yeah, a lot of the technologies that we test should work to bring down fuel poverty if they're implemented right, if they're implemented in homes that are suitable for them. But it matters a lot, the lifestyle of the residents as well, because if the residents can't change their lifestyle for whatever reason, then you need to fit a technology that is suitable for them. So I think that's something that's missing from, you know, solutions. We tend to look at the house rather than the people in it and how they live. There are automated solutions coming along that allow, you know, battery or heat storage, for example, so that you can shift energy use to different times of day, thinking about, you know, half-hourly metering, different differential pricing, that sort of thing.
Thank you very much for a really interesting discussion and presentations. I wanted to really explore the right to heat as a way of resolving fuel poverty. I've been working on fuel poverty now for about 30 years, and we still haven't solved the problem. So I'm trying to turn it on its head and wonder if, with all the new possible sources of heating, which in the short term, I think consumers will probably pay more. In the long term, hopefully it'll be a lot less. But for low-income people, there's actually quite a worry about whether putting themselves in hot for a long period of time will work. So I thought if we all had the right to fuel and we pooled the costs socially across a society like we do with the NHS, would we all be able to contribute so that we pay for it, but at the basis at which it is free for those who cannot afford it, so that they still get heated, but we're all contributing to the right to fuel, or heat rather, not fuel, because fuel is the wrong term. So I just wondered whether there were any reactions to that.
Peter's putting his hand up. I think it probably relates to your kind of stuff on heat as a service quite neatly.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thought. I mean, a sort of something that could be done, which takes us somewhat in that direction, would be, for instance, for, you know, either for electricity or gas, to have tariffs where the first, you know, so many thousand kilowatt hours were at a lower price, and then the more that you used, the unit price went up. So it meant that everybody, you know, would be entitled to a certain amount of gas or electricity at a modest price, which then may be cross-subsidised by charging people who use more, who presumably live in bigger houses and all the rest of it, with they're charged a high unit price. Of course, it's not a perfect thing, because there may be people who are in fuel poverty, who have large families or live in large properties that and they get caught by that extra charge. But it's interesting that, to the extent that tariffs do change with volume, generally stuff gets cheaper the more you use rather than more expensive. So that would be just my one thought.
Thanks, Peter. I think with now the eye on time.
Andy, can I just say one brief thing? I think the whole education thing is critical, because working in schools and talking with all sorts, teachers included in the schools and outside, the understanding of, well, energy, heat, the whole aspect of it, how it's paid for, how people can change the demand, and how you can individually do things. Particularly today being Earth Day as well, we need to actually get that education piece out there much better, so that everybody can understand, and it's not those that, I was going to say, almost the privileged, it feels like, that can do something, that do it. It should be everyone, because we can all do something.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. And I think I should thank everyone, really. Jenny, Peter Taylor, John Gluyas, Jenny Cooper, as well as the people who popped their hands up and added into the team very briefly at the end there.